All right, we're back here on The Drive here on 104.5 The Team, ESPN Radio, the free 104.5 The Team app. Mike, we are still in the wake of the Super Bowl and everything else that comes along with it. We're continuing to talk NFL and get you ready for the offseason, especially for your team, the New York Jets, as they have questions abound that need to be answered. But with that being said, we welcome back on to the show, good friend of The Drive, host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube, as well as the host on both ESPN Radio New York from time to time and ESPN Radio National, as will be heard tomorrow afternoon. That's our guy, Jake Asman. Mr. Asman, good afternoon. How are you, sir?
Hey, guys. Appreciate you having me back on the show. Hope all is well.
Yeah, things are good. Hope the same for you. It was a lot of fun to watch your coverage from Radio Row, which is kind of what led me to reach out to you. But I have to ask the most pressing journalistic question possible to start this one off. How was the comedy show with Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, and Shane Gillis?
Man, that is definitely the most important question. So, I appreciate that. It was awesome. You know, it was so funny too because I went with my friend Bobby Trossett, who longtime radio guy in the Baltimore area, covers the Ravens. He's never been to a stand-up comedy show, which I couldn't believe. Wow. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're in for something, man. You're about to see like three of the best in the game right now. Gillis was a surprise. He was not originally, I guess, supposed to be there. Yeah. They brought him out, and the place went nuts. And then obviously he crushed, and then the Segura came out, he crushed, and then Bert came out, he crushed. So all three were excellent, and it was a blast. And my friend Bobby probably had maybe like the most ideal first comedy show of his life. Yeah, that's almost like too high of a bar to set for every comedy show. Like they're all funny by nature, but I mean, you're right. That's heavy hitter after heavy. That's like having the first football game that you've ever watched be the Super Bowl. That's a tough way to start it. You're right. There's no doubt. And it was just such a fun environment. It's funny. I've seen a lot of comedy shows in my life, but that was the first time I think I've seen a show in an arena like that, the MGM Grand Arena, where they've done some of the biggest fights ever, in this country's history. So it was really cool. I've been there for boxing fights, but I've never been there for, a real comedy show. And it was just great energy, a lot of fun, night before the Super Bowl, all that. So it was a blast. There you go. Well, I got my important question out of the way, but I guess we might as well talk football while we have the chance. But just general takeaways from your end, from the time that you spent out in Vegas between Radio Row and some of those experiences like comedy. Just what was the last week in your life like when it comes to being there? It was a lot of fun, honestly. It was definitely some long days, a lot of work. You're kind of planning your day around when some of the guests you scheduled are available. So certainly some long days, but a lot of fun. I like Radio Row Week a lot from a content standpoint, just because you get a chance to talk to people you don't normally get a chance to talk to. Right? Like I'm not going to get opportunities to interview, Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars and Carrot Top all the time. So to get them on the show the same day you have, Emmett Smith and Luke Kuechly and Brian Urlacher. Jeez. Wow. That's pretty crazy. So just the guest opportunities out there, even just doing the live shows from out there. Just everyone's full of energy. Everyone's excited about the game coming up. So it's an awesome opportunity to give your audience maybe something a little different than what they normally get from me on YouTube or any of the radio shows I host. That is awesome, and me and Dan are only just a tad bit jealous. No, it's all right. No, I'm telling you, only about the comedy show. Everything else is fine. It was just it was just getting to see those guys live. I promise. Yeah, Jake, you also sat down with C.J. Mosley a week ago. What were your takeaways from him and what he had to say about Robert Saleh, and would you land on the same side as C.J. Mosley's comments? Yeah, look, it was cool to hear from someone actually on the team that could take you inside what's actually going on. And look, he's a Saleh guy, right? Saleh has obviously spoken so highly of CJ over the last couple of years, and CJ's play has been excellent since Robert Saleh became the head coach, and Saleh's got a history of working with linebackers. So you can see why there's that symmetry between the two guys. And it was great to hear from CJ just talk about how this season was tough, but we still believe we could go out there and we could be a playoff team next year. And honestly, what I enjoyed the most hearing about was he had been on the record previously at the end of the Jets season that when Aaron Rodgers came off IR and he wasn't cleared to be on the game day roster, but he was just practicing with the team. He had said previously that when Aaron was running the scout team offense against the number one defense, that he was winning a lot of the matchups. So I wanted to kind of hear more about that. Like, what did Aaron Rodgers coming off his Achilles injury look like at practice? And without saying it, he basically said he made a bunch of scrubs look like all pros against the Jets' elite defense. So I enjoyed that because, as a Jets fan, we're all basically just banking on the fact that this defense is really good again next year and Rodgers is healthy and he fixes a lot of the offensive issues. Like, that's really the genesis of the Jets' plan. Like, they're not going to be good if Rodgers isn't good. So it's just good to hear that, Rodgers, 5 months removed from, a catastrophic injury is already, playing great and making a bunch of guys that we've never heard of on a practice squad, look really good against an elite defense that has an elite secondary, led by Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed and all the other good players the Jets have. So that was cool to hear as a Jet fan. And CJ's such an awesome guy, likable guy. It was good to get a chance to kind of talk to him and, put a face to the name and, get a chance to really get to know him a little bit in that conversation.
Yeah. What's another year of waiting for Rodgers, right? I mean, we're used to it. You also sat down with Michael Penix. What were your impressions of him? And I know he talked about how he would love to be drafted by the Jets and maybe sit for a year behind Aaron Rodgers and learn. Do you think that's a realistic target for the Jets, or is this just something that? So I mean, the Jets. I don't think the Jets have a second-round pick right now. So is this something that might not happen for the Jets?
Yeah, I would say it's probably unlikely it happens. I mean, the scenario where maybe it does happen, I think they would need to trade out of 10 and then probably acquire a second-round pick and a trade back, and then maybe they could use, that pick on a quarterback, or if they trade back and get a couple extra thirds, maybe they package, some of their extra capital and they move up to take them, kind of like Will Levis. He was supposed to be a first-round pick a year ago. He falls out of round 1, and then Tennessee comes up to take him in round 2. Maybe the Jets could do that, but I would be surprised just because it's such an all-in year for this regime in 2024. I don't think they can afford to think about their long-term future at quarterback. You certainly could take one on day 3 and have that guy sit, behind Rodgers for a year, maybe 2.
Right.
But I think the Jets quarterback room is going to be Aaron Rodgers, a high-priced veteran they sign at free agency, like a Jacoby Brissett type, and then maybe someone on day 3 they pick. I liked Penix a lot. I enjoyed watching him at Washington these last couple seasons. I just don't think he's going to be in the Jets' plans, but hey, you never know. Crazy things happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Before we move on to other business of the day, obviously we want to direct everybody to your YouTube page to watch these interviews back. But any other memorable names and moments that came across in your time interviewing people at Radio Row that you still look back on today and go, man, I can't believe that happened.
There was. There were some great ones. I mentioned the Carrot Top interview.
Yeah.
The funny story with that was, I am a fellow redhead like Carrot Top. So at the end of the interview, I said, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. I just want to say on behalf of the redheaded community, thank you for your service. And he laughed and said, man, I've done a lot of these interviews. That's the funniest thing anyone said to me all day. And
wow.
Carrot Top thinks I'm funny. So I had that to, add to, the resume that, a professional comedian who's had a residency in Vegas for 30 years thinks I'm funny.
That's not too bad at all. Jake Asman with us right now on 104.5 The Team, the host of the Jake Asman Show on YouTube. And you can also hear him this weekend here on ESPN Radio. You can hear him from time to time on Mad Dog Radio on Sirius XM as well. And for updates on all of that, as well as, the New York Jets, make sure you follow him on Twitter at Jake Asman, ASMAN. You can follow the show on Twitter as well for updates as it goes live and things of that nature. And we transition over into an offseason that has a lot of questions that we're hoping on behalf of Jets fans that can be answered. I know this happened a little while ago, Jake, but we didn't get a chance to get your thoughts, I should say, on comments from Woody Johnson and what he had to say following the end of the Super Bowl. What'd you make of how honest he was?
Yeah, I think the honesty is maybe was the most surprising thing. I got to be honest. I'm no Zach Wilson fan, but I didn't love him saying, we didn't have a backup. It's like, well, that's kind of on you as the owner to maybe step in and say, let's go get a backup.
Right.
If that's your feeling. So I didn't love that, but there was nothing Woody said that was wrong. I mean, there was nothing he said that I feel like we as Jet fans also didn't know. He basically said, without saying the word playoff mandate, that, this regime's got to make the playoffs next year. Otherwise, there's going to be major changes, and there should be. He used the quote, we got to produce this year was unacceptable. I mean, all things that, you want to hear. I think what's most interesting about the comments, though, is the timing of it. Because if you remember, Woody Johnson, with 3 games to go, after the Jets had this debacle of a loss against the Dolphins where Zach Wilson got crushed and knocked out of the game, which ended up probably being his last ever, start as a Jet.
Right.
They lose, they get shut out. And then before the Commanders game with 3 games to go, he comes out to the New York Post and he says, Saleh, Douglas, Hackett, they're all coming back. We believe in this regime, and we're going to run it back. And the Jets then after that won 2 of their last 3 games, including that Commanders game that day. Then Woody Johnson now is kind of saying all these comments, months later. And to me, it's just a little odd because it's like with 3 games to go, you publicly endorsed everyone, and now you're basically coming out and you're sounding like George Steinbrenner a little bit, putting the pressure on the regime. So the timing of it, I thought, was a little odd. Maybe it coincides with that athletic story that came out that doesn't exactly paint Saleh and Douglas and the best light with the excuse making and everything else in that story. So I thought that was interesting, just maybe like the tone and the timing of Woody's comments, because once again, 3 games to go, and the Jets then went out there and won 2 of their final 3. He came out and endorsed everyone. So just the timing of it, I thought was interesting.
Jake, 7-round mock draft you and Cole Thompson released today. What is your dream scenario for the Jets at 10?
I think my dream scenario is Joe Alt makes it there because I think he's the best offensive lineman in the class. If that doesn't happen and the Jets are faced with a scenario where they could move back and possibly pick up, as we were talking about, that 2nd-round pick and still end up with one of these top linemen, I think that would be something I would fully be on board with. And then the other scenario for the Jets, Olu Fashanu, the left tackle from Penn State's the guy that many people think might be the best just pure pass protector right away. Alt might be the best overall lineman, but Fashanu is a guy who can come in and immediately play left tackle at a high level and pass protect, which, look, we know Breece Hall can run behind any offensive line after last year. They need to find someone that can block and help Aaron Rodgers out. So I would say Alt, Fashanu, or maybe a trade back where you're still picking in the teens and you get some extra picks. That, to me, would be like the ideal scenario for the Jets. I think they're in a good spot to get a really good tackle at 10. I think the question is going to be, which one's actually there at 10 for them to decide between.
Is there any world where they would pivot to take a wide receiver to go opposite Garrett Wilson, or is that not as much of a priority at that point?
I do think it's possible. I think the big question with that is, what have they already done in free agency to that point where you feel like you could afford to make that pick? Because I'll tell you what, if Malik Neighbors is there or Rome Odunze is there at 10, like you're talking about instant plug and play, stud receivers. And the last time the Jets drafted a receiver in round 1, I don't need to tell you guys this or Jet fans this, it was Garrett Wilson, who's incredible. So I don't hate the idea of it. I think a lot of it depends on what they had already done in free agency up until that point. They signed, let's say, Calvin Ridley, and they signed only one offensive lineman. Well, then I think you look at pick 10 and go, okay, where are they going to get their right or left tackle in the draft? If they signed a bunch of offensive linemen, but they didn't add that, that number 2 receiver next to Garrett, maybe the draft is a spot for them to do that. So I think so much of what the Jets do in the draft is contingent on free agency. But as we sit here right now, I would personally be surprised if their 1st-round pick is not used on an offensive tackle.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Jake, I was watching Get Up this morning. Mike Tannenbaum was on the show. I know you've talked to him before. They were doing a segment about like mock trades, and there was one for the Jets, and it was the Jets should trade C.J. Mosley for Brandon Cooks. And I didn't quite understand it, but maybe
certainly an idea.
So maybe the Jets don't do that one, but do you think there's a Jets trade that happens in this offseason, perhaps a Devontae Adams type player? Do you think the Jets are going to make some kind of big move when it comes to a trade in this offseason?
Yeah, it's funny. I saw that Tannenbaum trade online, and I'm like, there's no way he actually suggested this. And then
it was brutal.
Multiple people said, no, he did. And so I could maybe do a YouTube video on that as a side note. Yeah. But as far as the trade goes, I think the Jets are going to be aggressive in the receiver market for a trade, right? I think you look at the last couple NFL off seasons, we have seen receivers get moved. A lot of times receivers get moved, and we're not even expecting them to get moved. Like, I don't think anyone had Tyreek Hill getting traded a couple of years ago, or A.J. Brown. I mean, you go back, Amari Cooper was dealt, Hollywood Brown was dealt. I mean, it's been a while since the Jets themselves have made a notable trade for a receiver, but the last time they had a winning season, they went out there and acquired Brandon Marshall for a 5th-round pick.
Yeah.
He had maybe the greatest single season a Jet wide receiver's ever had with Fitzpatrick in 2015. Yeah. So I do think if you're looking at a potential trade, you would look at receivers. Cortland Sutton's a name to watch. I know Brandon Ayuk, people are going to speculate on. I don't think the Jets are going to be able to get involved in that, but definitely keep your eyes on potential receivers that are available in a trade, because it would make a lot of sense for the Jets to explore that as a way to bolster their team ahead of the draft.
Don't mind that one bit. Jake, before we let you go, where can we hear you this weekend?
This weekend, I am working on ESPN Radio nationally from 2 to 5 p.m. It will be Courtney Cronin and myself. We got you covered.
Very nice, very nice.
And then Sunday, I'm on Mad Dog Sports Radio, Sirius XM Channel 82 from 4 to 8 Eastern. So back-to-back days of national radio on 2 different stations, so I'm pumped up. Can't wait.
Absolutely. Awesome. We'll have you here on 104.5 The Team on Saturday, and then, we'll be rooting for you on Mad Dog Radio, just by not having it. But regardless of that, he is Jake Asman, host of the Jake Asman Show, also host on ESPN Radio, Sirius XM. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Jake Asman. Follow the show on Twitter as well. Jake, we always appreciate the time. Thank you for the insights and for the recap of everything Radio Row out in Vegas. We always appreciate it. Good luck this weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure, guys. And, hopefully one of these days, the 3 of us will attend a comedy show as well.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah. If those 3 ever unite together again for a show, we're going to have to get tickets to go see them together. But regardless of that, we'll take a break here on The Drive. Be back with more right after this here on 104.5 The Team.